next speaker trained as a clinical psychologist before becoming well known as Australia's first real sex therapist. And as a young boy, I do remember some of her articles quite vividly. She then became a respected social commentator, appearing regularly on television and radio and writing about gender issues. She's now exposing the lie of free speech on some of our university campuses and campaigns to end the demonisation of men. Please welcome Bettina Arndt, who will speak on the wicked witches are winning, campus rape scare campaigns and other feminist success stories.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a great pleasure to be here. And particularly, I was able to combine this event with finally getting to speak at UWA a couple of days ago. And that was really interesting for me because it's taken a long time to get onto the campus here in Perth. Last year, the Union of Students passed a resolution vowing to stop me speaking on campuses. The agenda item at their conference was called By Bettina, the cheeky little ratbags. They also voted to give money to anyone who wanted to oppose me speaking on campuses. Isn't that a great use of compulsory student fees? So they're managing to intimidate student groups across the country who are now getting increasingly nervous about hosting my talks. I ended up here in Perth having to book the event in my name. The university wouldn't allow me to do any advertising on campus, to hand out flyers, put up posters, none of that. And yet you look at the posters that we went around and photographed some of the posters currently up on campus, which included things like talks on the entitlement of rich white men, the system behind sexism, fuck border walls, and yet my talk of my discussion of the truth about the rape crisis wasn't allowed. I was also made to pay $350 for extra security guards on top of the ones the university was provided. And in fact, they weren't needed at all. That unfortunately, this group of students has twigged to the fact that they play into my hands by having protests against me, and so they stayed away, and my security guards just stood there with nothing to do. But we had over 200 people, overflowing hall of people who did want to hear what I had to say. Unfortunately, not nearly as many students as I would have liked. But what I loved is the UWA gave a quote to a local newspaper offering counselling to any student or staff who are distressed by the content of my talk. I mean, these people are totally barking mad. But it's a worrying sign to me that the university administrations have absolutely been captured by the feminists who are promoting the rape crisis rhetoric. Now, I assume you know something about what this is all about and what I've been doing on campuses. This was the second talk in my campus tour. The first at La Trobe was banned by the administration, who claimed it clashed with the values of the university. We managed to get that one, them retreating on that position after a sort of media pressure. Then at Sydney University, we needed the riot squad to be called in to enable my audience to have access to the venue, because they were totally blocking the venue and being really aggressive towards my audience. I made an official complaint to the university for failing to enforce their own codes of conduct in relation to the organisers of that particular protest. Now it's 4 months since I made that complaint. Since then, the Vice-Chancellor, Michael Spence, has publicly proclaimed that the whole fuss about my protest was a circus, saying nothing really happened, and lied blatantly by saying that my audience was not prevented from accessing my talk. Failing to mention, of course, the only way that happened was at vast public expense. The riot squad had to be called in to make this happen. 2 years ago, Sydney University took no action when their own investigation unit determined that Maddie Ford, who was one of the main organisers of my protest, she was given that their own investigation team determined she should have a 1 semester misconduct suspension because she'd flashed her tits at an anti-Christian abortion group on campus. You could have a look at my YouTube video showing her in all her glory. And so, so there was this misconduct charge. Sydney University totally ignored that. They're not taking any action. It's pretty obvious to me they're not going to take any action about my complaint, and they're doing their best to absolutely bury the problem. So last week I organised a raid at Sydney University, which went off wonderfully. We had a bunch of students from other universities because we didn't want to get the Sydney Uni kids into trouble. And we delivered, it was what I called my Truth Blitz. We circulated 2,000 copies of this document. I'll have some of them available if you want to have a look. It's a very carefully written flyer, if you like, telling people what's happening on our campuses, telling people what's going on with this manufactured rape crisis and why it's really dangerous for male students. And I mean, it worked wonderfully. We distributed them under the door of every college room, particularly where there were male students, and in a lot of the STEM subject lecture rooms. Now, my goal with all of this was to warn male students that the end goal of this rape crisis campaign that I'm fighting against is to force universities to get involved in adjudicating rape cases on campus using a lower standard of proof than is available under criminal law. And their aim is to get more rape convictions. And it's already happening here. We've already got 4 universities who've introduced new regulations, including Sydney, for investigating and adjudicating rape cases using a balance of probabilities rather than the much more stringent criminal law provisions. So we are having this system of kangaroo courts being established on our universities based around a believe the victim concept, which means only women are going to be believed. 2 years ago, I was approached by a student from Adelaide University, a PhD student who said he'd been approached by a university committee investigating a rape charge against him. And I got a criminal barrister to help us negotiate this. 7 months it took of negotiation to and from the university. He was advised by my barrister not to go near this committee. They had no legal right to enforce him to appear before them, that he should insist that he be given full details of the accusation against him. Endless argy-bargy once back and forth. That committee had the right to withhold his PhD, and he was a very nervous young man throughout this process. And in the end, the General Counsel of the University suddenly charged him. She obviously got really worried, and she assured us all that he would be given full legal protection, and she got details of the accusation. She realised they were heading into deep trouble legally by barging in with people who didn't know what they were doing and interfering with what could be a really serious criminal matter. And it turned out, we got the details of the accusation, and it turned out that many of her allegations could be disproved by the social media evidence he had about that she alleged he was always the one pursuing him, and that we could prove that it was the other way around. I don't know what happened in that bedroom. In the end, the university totally backed down, gave him his PhD, and obviously believed it was too confusing a picture to believe the victim in this case. So he was given his PhD and with great relief left the university. But what's interesting for me is not actually what happened in that bedroom, but what on earth was the university doing, getting involved in the messy business of trying to decide whose story to believe in a date rape case involving 2 students. And that's the whole point. It's really difficult for people to know who to believe in a he said, she said case, where, if you put this case before a jury, most jurors are not going to send a young man to prison when they don't know where the truth lies, and that it's only his word against hers. And that's the reason why the feminists are trying to get these cases adjudicated on campus. The low conviction rate of date rape cases has the feminists up in arms, and that's why this whole push is happening, to establish a different system of justice at our universities. And that is exactly what happened nearly a decade ago in America, where under the Obama regime, all publicly funded universities were required to set up tribunals to adjudicate rape cases under this believe the victim system, which denies the young man normal legal protections, where the judgment is made under a lower standard of proof. And across the country, thousands of young men were thrown out of universities and colleges. And it's led to innumerable lawsuits against the universities, most of which the families of these young men are winning. The universities are losing and losing heaps of money as a result of this whole system. And the Trump administration has come in and is now passing new regulation to ensure due process rights of the accused in these tribunal systems. And that's met with widespread applause. The surveys showing most people agree that it all went too far and that it's been dangerous to tinker with traditional standards of law, and that they agree with offering proper due process rights in these circumstances. And there have been editorials across the country supporting this. Now, just look at this. What in the hell are we doing heading down the same road where we can see where this is all going? I mean, that's what I find quite extraordinary. But we are proceeding down this road, galloping down this road. We have seen here at exactly the same thing that happened in America, a really orchestrated campaign to claim there was a rape crisis on our campuses. After years of scaremongering from the feminists, they persuaded the Australian Human Rights Commission to spend $1 million of our money, which was trying to prove there was a rape crisis on campus. So they did a very large survey across all our universities, and they came up with virtually nothing. The data showed that only 0.8% of students reported being sexually assaulted in any of the, they only studied it for 2 years, so in each of the 2 years study, 0.8%. But it wasn't just including what most of us would think of as rape or sexual assault. That included, 40% of the students who said yes to that said it wasn't serious enough to report, or that there was, 40% said they didn't need help. We're talking about many incidents that most of us wouldn't think of as rape. The definition included being tricked into sex against your will, or having a stranger touch you on the train to uni, rub himself against you, or whatever. Nothing to do with university rape, in actual fact. Even with all of that, that's all they got. They got 99.2% of people saying they'd had no such experience. And what they mainly found was a lot of unwanted staring, low-grade sexual harassment, a sexual joke, a sexual comment, but mainly staring. And so it proved a real fizzer for the feminists, this big survey. And yet, on the night that the Human Rights Commission announced their results, they totally fudged those results, saying we have an enormous problem of sexual violence on campus, and of course they're mainly talking about harassment, and presenting this as a horrendous state of affairs. This week, Channel 9 News interviewed one of the protesters against me, or one of the activists working against me, who announced, that my statistics were all wrong, and he produced all these statistics where he deliberately included the harassment figures. If you listen carefully, you'll see, I've got it up on my Facebook. He talks about sexual assault and harassment, because that means he can say most people have been harassed. Most people have had sexual violence on campus. They're constantly shifting the goalposts in order to present this as an ongoing problem. And everybody is jumping on board. Not a single Vice-Chancellor across Australia was prepared to say, we don't have a problem, we should celebrate our safe campuses. Tanya Plibersek is now saying she's going to remove funding from universities that don't do more to promote this issue of addressing sexual violence on campus, which means targeting young men. Someone recently sent me a speech, a very old speech, 1965 speech from Ayn Rand, where she was talking about, it was on campus speech, why reason when I can riot? And she was talking about the Berkeley riots and pointing out that no one took on the ideology that was being promoted in their riots. No one ever challenged them or confronted them, refuted the students' core arguments. And as she said, the uncontested absurdities of today are the acceptance slogans of tomorrow. They come to be accepted by degree, by dint of constant pressure on one side and constant retreat on the other, until one day they're suddenly declared to be the country's official ideology. That's what's happening under our watch at our universities. We are letting it happen. We are constantly retreating and allowing these mad people to control the discourse in our universities and to set up regulations to target young men. And one day future generations are going to berate us for our negligence. The madness of the whole thing to me is absolutely exposed by the fact that we've never had more young women flocking into our universities. 60% of graduates are now women. Do you really think those women would be desperate to get into colleges if they really, or university, if they thought there was a rape crisis there? Would their families be letting them attend university? It's totally nonsensical. But the campus rape scare is only one example of the worrying grip of feminism on all our institutions and the male-bashing culture which has evolved as a consequence. Last year I was approached by a filmmaker here in Perth actually wanting me to take part in a documentary he was making on sexism, and he was making it for SBS, and I said I'm not going to have anything to do with that because SBS is short, and they'll do a long interview with me and then they'll cut it up and make me look like a total dodo. No one at SBS has ever done me any favours. But they pleaded with me and said, we've got this data, we've done this big survey on sexism, and we found the mainstream view is really cynical about the feminist rhetoric around this being a sexist country. And the statistics were really interesting. Only 19% of Australians identify as feminists. Almost half the population felt feminism has gone too far. By far the majority felt, 76% felt men suffer from sexism too. So I did the interview, I persuaded Renee Gorman and a few other people to come on and talk about this broader view of sexism. And of course, what does SBS do? They left out every shred of evidence that challenged the feminist rhetoric. They did this appalling program which had, little girls in tears at the thought that they will never earn as much as men, or that they're going to have to walk the streets pursued by rapists. And the compere said she was in, the compere at the end is in tears herself at the thought of her children living in such a sexist world. I mean, it was just appalling. And that's what the men in this country are up against. There's a constant feminist campaign promoting a barrage of misinformation aimed at demonising men and presenting women as victims. And we live in a society where rules, laws and regulations are being systematically tilted to advantage women at the expense of men. And I've been writing about this for over 30 years, and I've distributed a bookmark about my new book, #Men2, which is serving very nicely to irritate the feminists, my title. But what's interesting for me is that book is mainly a collection of articles that were published in The Australian, and I can hardly get into The Australian anymore. I can hardly get into any men's mainstream media talking about what's happening to men. So what I'm mainly doing now is making YouTube videos talking about what's happening out there to men and boys. And in January this year, I released a video about a woman called Sarah Jane Parkinson, who's just been sent to prison in Canberra as a result of making false rape accusations. And I've been following this story for years. People are constantly reaching out to me, telling me about what's happening to the men in their lives. And in this case, I was contacted by the father of a young man who ended up in prison for 4 months as a result of these false rape accusations from Sarah Jane Parkinson. It's the most amazing story. So Parkinson is engaged to a guy called Dan Jones. He's a prison guard. She starts working for a police station in an administrative role. Turns out she has an affair with a policeman. Dan discovers this and calls off the engagement. And she's very cross, and she uses her new boyfriend, the policeman, and his other corrupt police mates to destroy Dan's life. So they make false accusations about him, domestic violence accusations against him, and then they follow that up, which is the standard ploy, with allegations claiming he'd breached his AVO, his violence order. And so then he was totally set up. If you have a breached violence order, the next thing that happens, you go to jail. And that's exactly what happened. She's then made these amazing rape accusations where she hit herself over the head with a brick. She claimed she left an empty condom wrapper. I thought it was a very nice thought that this very considerate rapist used a condom before he raped her. And the police said, well, what happened to the condom? And she said, the cat ate the condom. So there's this rape accusation. That day, Dan was sent to jail. He actually had a totally solid alibi on the night in question. And they didn't even investigate that. They sent him straight to jail. He is a prison guard. A screw going into Goulburn prison is really at risk of being, persecuted by the other prisoners. And he had to spend 4 months in isolation, thinking he was facing up to 15 years imprisonment if her trumped-up allegations were believed. He was suicidal, a most extraordinary situation. But the plot thickens because there's a good detective, a female as it happened, who realised that there's something fishy about these false allegations. She starts to investigate. There's one scene where she tells the bad cops who are about to descend on the alleged scene of the rape, the fake rape. She says, don't fucking touch anything to the bad guy. This reads out of a scene in the book, The Bill, or some sort of cop show, this whole thing. So here we have this good detective who's onto Parkinson, and she sets up a sting operation where she starts following Parkinson's movements, and they're tracking what she's up to. And what is Parkinson has Dan in jail, and then she goes after Dan's father, who is remortgaging his house so he can fight this. He ended up spending well over $300,000 trying to defend his son. And so Parkinson and the other crooked cops go after Dan's parents, and they plant false evidence of stolen goods on his property, and they make violence allegations against his parents. This whole saga goes on for nearly 5 years, with her using every trick in the book to prolong the legal cases. Dan is let out of prison after 4 months when the good detective brings together all the evidence, including evidence that she'd made rape allegations against people in the past, other people. They present it all to a magistrate in the middle of the night, who takes one look at it and says, get him out of prison, because it was so obvious this was all a stitch up. And it's been an amazing story, and hallelujah, finally this woman was sent to prison. And that is so rare. Since that story was published, I have heard from people across the country who have... yesterday I was on the phone to Albany in tears. Her son is in prison as a result of false rape allegations. And I don't know all the details of all these cases, but you listen to them and you really worry at how the law is so tilted to not give men a fair hearing. And it's just extraordinary. Because to me, the real issue about Dan Jones's case is it shows how easy it is for a malicious woman to use our current laws to ruin a man's life. Across the country, or you don't even need any evidence to get an apprehended violence order against a man. You can just allege you are fearful that violence could occur. That's enough. You can call the police, they will remove your husband from the house, they will destroy any chance of him seeing the children for years on end. He faces criminal charges, and if you manage to get him to breach that order, you can then get him sent to prison. Do you know what women do to get men to breach their violence orders? They get their children to ring up on his birthday, and if he picks up the phone, he's breaching the order. Isn't that just the whole thing just drives me totally crazy. Every day I hear, not just from men, but from women, really worried about what's happening in this country, watching what's happening to their sons, their brothers, their friends, appalled at the male bashing, the corruption of our legal system, and so few dare talk about it. The wicked witches are succeeding in controlling debate and closing down debate on any number of issues, from the rape crisis scare campaign to domestic violence and our corrupted family law system, to ludicrous quotas favouring women. I mean, reducing the fitness requirements for our police force and our fire departments and our army, so that women have to be, can get in because they can pass, they don't have to carry a man's weight anymore. Or a policeman wrote to me the other day and said, you don't have to get over a fence anymore, which used to be a requirement to be able to scale the height of a fence. And of course the burglars don't know that the police can't scale the height of a fence anymore. So, it's been done systematically to, have I got 5 minutes? 2. Okay, briefly. I mean, look at the Me Too movement, which started off as something really serious and then morphed into people using really trivial accusations of incidents that might have happened 40 years ago to ruin men's lives. And the media is publishing this stuff, unproven allegations with no real investigation of the truth of the matter. That dreadful domestic violence advertising campaign when the little boy slams the door in the little girl's face. I mean, David Lionhelm has grilled the bureaucrats and Senate estimates and proven that there is no evidence whatsoever supporting the central premise of that program, that advertising campaign, with the domestic violence in this country is due to the misogynist attitudes to women. That applies in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and deeply misogynist countries. There is no evidence it applies in countries like Australia. And yet we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars promoting that rubbish. I could go on and on, but I just want to say I have a team of volunteers. People every day contact me saying, how can I help with your various campaigns? I need more people to come on board. Yesterday I received a major defamation case against me, being funded by the feminists, with the woman who runs Ed Rape on campus is suing me now for defamation. I need lots of lawyers, not just to protect me, but to protect men across the country who aren't getting a fair hearing. But I also need people to help with campaigns in schools. People are really worried that their little boys are in schools where on White Ribbon Day, the boys have to stand up and denounce their own violence, while little girls, who can be just as vicious, just as bad as bullies, sit there bewildered to see the boys being demonised in that way. So I hope I'm going to encourage you not just to sit there. We need good people to come on board and take action. Nothing is going to change if we let the feminists, the wicked witches, win all the battles. Thank you.